Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ICG's Digital Academy webinar series. I'm Sally Alsop, a member of the ICG committee, and I'm responsible for running our webinar programme. So in today's webinar, you'll be hearing from Phil Barton, Managing Director of DeCODE Marketing Limited and author of Decoded, The Science Behind Why We Buy. Phil has over 25 years client-side brand management experience. After 16 years with Unilever, he worked at Diageo and TMobile, and whilst responsible for TMobile's brand positioning and development around Europe, he became a client of DeCODE Marketing Consultancy and first encountered behavioural science. DeCode's work led to the Liverpool Street flash mob dance TV ad, which increased T-Mobile's sales by 49%, and further work halved customer churn. This epiphanal moment led Phil to set up and run DeCODE Marketing Limited in the UK 10 years ago now. He is one of the very few experts to combine a practitioner's perspective with a profound knowledge of behavioural science. This morning, Phil is going to take us on a whistle-stop tour of the principles of behavioural science and how applying them to the work that we do can help improve the validity of the insights we deliver. I'm very happy to say that Phil has agreed to take questions at the end, so please type them into the question box as usual as we go through, and we'll read them out during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. He's also willing, if we run out of time, to take questions by email afterwards and respond to them. So we're really grateful to Made in Studios for sponsoring this webinar. Made in Studios is an MIS Group brand offering the most modern and stunning viewing facilities in Birmingham and across France in Paris, Lyon and Lille. Before I hand over to Phil, here are the next webinars to note in your diaries. Some are open for registration now. Also, there are still sponsorship opportunities for a couple of forthcoming webinars if anyone's interested. Again, as a reminder, this costs £100 for plenty of exposure on our website, mailers and social media, and of course on the day. So our speaker today is Phil Barton. I'll now hand over to Phil.
Thank you very much. The clean-shaven photo and the unshaven lockdown version appears before you. I hope you can now see my screen. Thank you for joining, and this is going to be a whistle-stop tour through decision science. Let me first define what I mean by decision science. It's deliberately a blend of different scientific and academic fields, ranging from neuroscience through cognitive, social and evolutionary psychology and behavioural economics, and including cultural anthropology and semiotics. And it's deliberately a blend because, in my experience, it's that holistic view that gives us a better understanding of why we buy stuff, how advertising works or doesn't, why we buy certain brands and not others. This is going to be a whistle-stop tour, and it was incredibly frustrating to know what to leave out of this talk, because it is such a wide-ranging and fascinating subject. As alluded to in the introduction, I actually made a huge life and career change 10 years ago. I quit a senior role at TMobile to set DeCODE up on my own in the UK in the middle of the last recession. So I was either completely mad or I felt that there's something here. And the something that's here was founded on my experience in brand and marketing management, because at the heart of marketing is behaviour change. We want people to buy a brand or to change perception, or to tell people about an ad, or whatever it might be, buy more of our brands, switch brands. It's all about behavior change. And what I learned working with academics and scientists is, frankly, they know more about human behavior than the commercial world knows. They've been studying human behavior for decades, and in the commercial world we had some models, some mental models of how the world worked, And what I found is that science and academia not only challenged those models, changed, modified some, but in some cases proved them fundamentally wrong. And that's uncomfortable because, you know, I grew up in Unilever, spent 16 years there in marketing, and I felt I was pretty good at marketing and I knew what made brands work, but I had to revise my views. And I'm going to introduce you to some of that. So some of you may already be doing some of this, you may be aware of some of this, but I don't think that matters because we can have a recap and a refresh. And for other people for whom it's relatively new, I hope I'll give you some things that will challenge your thinking and some meat to think about. Just very quickly to talk about the company, to introduce you, because I think it helps understand where we come from. So DeCODE was founded by a neuroscientist and a psychologist in Germany, and they grew very quickly because they found that the combination of their knowledge was in huge demand with brand-owning clients. And they recruited other scientists and academics, and along the way they accrued clients like myself. We also have the ex-head of insight from Beiersdorf. We have an SVP marketing from Henkel. We have a couple of people who were ad agency planning directors. And we've got a guy who was in the behavioral science unit in Cincinnati for Procter & Gamble. People from Ipsos and Cantar Millward Brown as well in our research team. So we're a real mixture of the pure cutting edge knowledge of behavior and then the practical application of this, because we want, you know, ultimately we're trying to sell more stuff. So we work across a range of approaches, both consulting, quantitative research. We do a lot of training, and more recently AI. Our client base will not be strangers to yourselves, mostly FMCG, but also quite a lot of service brands as well. And increasingly, we're finding that clients like myself, because I was a client of DeCODE when I first experienced this, and I'll show you the results of the work we did, we're increasingly finding that people are starting to embrace this. It's not mainstream by any stretch of the imagination, and that's largely because the brain is resistant to change. You know, we prefer to default to the status quo. So change management per se is hard. But gradually over time, with social proof and case studies, we're finding that people are starting to adopt this more simply because it works. And let's look at why it's important. Now, yeah, I'm sure you've all by now heard of Professor Daniel Kahneman. Some of you may have read his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. If you've completed it, congratulations. A lot of people start it, but don't finish it, which is a shame because it's real gold. It's a gold mine of information. But Kahneman, of course, introduced us to this dual system processing. He wasn't the first, by the way. That's not what he earned his Nobel laureate for. What his real insight was that system one deals with perception and intuition and is bound by the stimuli that we perceive. That was the real insight that was new. Two systems have been around for a while, and a lot of people conflate this erroneously with emotional and rational. And that's not surprising because we're victims of our own system one, so we jump to plausible explanations and we kind of pigeonhole conveniently, oh yeah, we know about emotion, that's automatic, so that's system one, and rational stuff is about thinking, so that's system two. But that misses 2 points. One, the real distinction between system one and system two is automatic versus controlled mental processes. And automatic processes can also be cognitive, not just affective. So if you think about things like speaking or walking or driving your car, they are all once learned automatic cognitive processes, but you wouldn't class walking as emotional, right? It just doesn't make sense. So it's a system one process, but system one processes can be cognitive as well as affective. And the same with system two. If we ask people questions about why they like or dislike an advert, that's a reflective mental process, but you're asking about affective components. So both system one and system two can be so-called rational and emotional. So that's the wrong distinction. The difference is automaticity versus control, reflex versus reflect. Those are the real differences. And why it's important for us to understand this better is that understanding how system one works, and importantly this sort of implicit, the sort of pre-conscious mental process, determines and drives so much of our behavior and our decisions. So even things like this is interesting. Like left and right have a price reduction. The deal is identical, £8 down to £5.99. So why would there be a significant difference in purchase intent between the two? It just doesn't make sense. But science can tell us, can explain it. And we go back to science to help. We know how the brain processes numbers, and that simply explains this. Size congruency, a big number, big font, small number, small font, means that they are congruent, and the brain processes that more easily than things that are incongruent. And simply because we process something more easily or fluently, as the scientists call it, means that the brain prefers it. Simple as. Yet, you know, you put this in front of consumers and ask them about it, and they'll tell you there's no difference. But in reality, there is. Or even pack design. The pack on the right, 20% higher purchase intention, again because it's more fluent for right-handed people, which is the majority of the population, to mentally simulate picking up that fork. And you can't stop that simulation. That's an automatic system one reflex that we mentally simulate picking up that fork. So it's easy to pick up the fork on the right because that's what you always do, and that familiarity breeds liking and intended behavior. Or this example here, two different pack designs for cookies. In focus groups, people said they preferred the one with the bigger cookies because they just look more appetizing. But when they put them on test in store and A/B testing, in reality, people bought the pack that looked like it had more cookies in it. So they told us one thing and they did something else. And that's because the brain connotes that quantity of cookies with a higher reward value. But why wasn't that picked up before? You know, why do people say one thing and do another? It's because we need to understand these implicit cues. Well, even something as simple as anchoring, a lovely study. Look, Snickers ice cream, one sales message, buy some for your freezer. The second one, buy 18 for your freezer. That's all. That was the only change, the number 18. That created an anchor that resulted in an almost doubling of average weight of purchase. No price discount, no promotion, just the number 18. And if we can understand these processes and these cues, which science does, then we can leverage them and we can harness them. And it's not only the cues, but it's also how people perceive different brands. So this was an interesting study with one of our clients who was a bank. They had a tracking study, as many clients do, with a bunch of attributes, which you can see down the left-hand side, expected, successful, fair, etc., measured using an explicit tracking study. So using a Likert scale, you know, on a scale of 1 to 7, rate these two banks. And you can see the data there, not a lot to choose between them. When you measure the same banks against the same attributes, now using an implicit testing method, which is typically what we use is a reaction time-based method where you're getting response in like 0.8 of a second. So you're getting that pure system one reflex, not the reflective thought through answer. You can now see how the data pattern changes. The data on the right-hand side are much more sensitive to differences between the two banks. And in a few cases, the positions of the banks are actually reversed. And this is important because those data are the ones that the consumer's brain are using to make decisions, whereas the data on the left is typically what the clients and their agencies were using to make decisions and allocate budgets, etc. And in this example, our client, Bank B, was able to change their comms strategy as a result of understanding the real implicit differences, and they won customers from Bank A. So this is terribly important. It's terribly important as well when it comes to buying brands, because we know that despite what you might think when someone is faced with a purchase decision which includes their favorite brand, you might think that their brain would kind of light up and respond emotionally with a lot of resonance and engagement to that purchase decision. And in fact, it doesn't. The brain, this is a study where people were put in brain scanners and asked to do exactly that, make purchase decisions of choice of brands, including their favorite or excluding their favorite, but also including brands in their repertoire, so in their consideration set. So it's not like something they would never ever consider. And counterintuitively, when the strong brand was present in the choice, the decision was taken just like that, literally a no-brainer, with very little cortical activity, as you can see on the right-hand side. Whereas when the brain is thinking, it hasn't seen its favorite brand, system 2 processes are engaged in order to trade off and reflect and choose a brand to buy. So the brain prefers to operate on system 1 because the brain on the right is using less than 5% of the body's available energy. The brain on the left is using up to 40% of the body's energy. And it is important for something much more significant than buying brands. It's crucial for survival. And that's exactly why System 1 has evolved over millennia to be the most energy efficient operating system we can have. So a strong brand becomes a shortcut. It is literally a no-brainer decision when we're buying our favorite brands. So how do we harness all this stuff? It sounds sort of kind of crazy. So here's a framework that we use that I want to walk you through and give you some examples just so you can to bring it to life. So on the left-hand side, we have what your clients are doing. They're producing signals, stimuli, data, if you like, that come into the brain. So whether it's above the line, below the line, atomic, digital, physical, packaging, experiences, events, sponsorship, it doesn't matter. All of this stuff is designed to go into the brain and have some effect. And on the right hand side, we have the behavior that we're seeking. This is all overarched by context, because context is critical. It can change everything, of course. And it's underpinned by our associative memory, which is our system 1 operating system, if you like. But what happens between someone seeing an ad or someone holding a pack or whatever it might be and behavior are largely 3 blocks of mental processing. Firstly, we have attention and perception. We have to get into the brain in order to be processed, full stop. If we don't get into the brain, then nothing else happens. Having got into the brain then seeks to understand what the incoming data represents. So we pattern match, we search associative memory, and metaphorically the brain is asking the questions: what is it? What does it represent? What does this mean? Where do I know it from? So we're decoding and understanding this thing that's coming in. And then and only then do we get a decision. What's in it for me? Is it rewarding or threatening? Do I approach it? Do I avoid it? And that can take a couple of routes. It can either be decided based on a heuristic. You've heard of the so-called nudges like social proof, authority, scarcity, things like this, a sort of automated decision rules. Or it can be a goal and helping us to meet a goal. And we're going to talk about that in more detail. So this is a framework. Now let's have a look at each one of these in turn, because science helps us understand. So attention and perception. Firstly, one principle of attention. We can direct attention in a visual to where we want people to look by using something known as contrast, right? Not difficult, we kind of know this, but it's universal. Human beings will always pay attention to things that contrast with the surroundings, whether it's size, shape, color, or orientation. And there are others as well, motion or implied motion. And another good example is human faces. So here's a mailing, some work we did with BT. This mailing with an offer wasn't getting the response rate they wanted, and they asked us why. And we used some visual salience AI which is built on eye tracking, to understand why it wasn't getting the traction and the response they wanted. And we told them the problem is the face. Again, we know a universal principle of attention is that faces are incredibly significant. We will fixate on a face with a probability of greater than 80% within the first 2 eye movements if a face is present. And that goes back to survival again. You know, friend or foe, a mate, someone threatening, whatever it might be, what's their intention? So we will always look at the face. The problem here is that the face becomes a magnet of attention and draws attention away from the offer, which is on the right-hand side of the page, those coloured roundels that you can see. So our solution to BT was quick and dirty. Take the face off, because once you do, you allow those roundels to then operate by the principle of contrast in color, in shape, and in size. And now look what happens to hotspots of attention. They are the offer is now much more visibly visible and salient. And what happened in their test, response went up by nearly a third. And that's not, that's not a trivial response increase when you're sending out millions of mailings. So just harnessing a known principle and applying it to client work, they're going to do this anyway. They're going to print the material anyway. So why not make it as effective as you can? And another example here, we just talked about faces, but there's another principle known as gaze cueing. So the difference between the visual, this ad at the top and the bottom is where the model is looking. And the top one, she's looking at us, the viewer, which is very engaging for us and nice emotional reward. In the bottom one, she's looking at the product. And you can see from the eye tracking results here how our gaze goes to where she's looking. And that happens in everyday life. You go out on the street, there's a couple of people looking up in the air, where do you look? Because it could be threatening, it could be rewarding or interesting. So we look where other people look. The visual at the bottom sold 12% more than the one at the top. So again, just harnessing something and it works. Perception is all, of course, wrapped up in this. And one of the key things that I learned coming into this is that perception beats cognition every time. What you see is all there is. That's what Kahneman says. And we did some testing of perceived expense of price tickets. And these are the results. Objectively, rationally, of course, they're identical. But subjectively and in perceptual terms, they're very different, because the one at the top right, we learn, has codes from premium type products, the starburst, the embossing, the silver color, whereas down the bottom left, this is discount that. This is Aldi and Lidl pricing or promotional pricing. So we perceive it to be lower. And because we perceive it to be lower, it will be lower. So when, there's some other things you can do here to affect the perception of price, not just dropping price or increasing price, but affecting how price is perceived. Okay, let's move on to cognition now. So this is how we're decoding meaning. And this comes through what clients are always seeking, that elusive term called branding. A communication has to be branded. What does that mean? Well, when I was a brand manager, I naively assumed it meant make the logo bigger, and that's what I normally said to the agency. But of course, I now know it doesn't have to be the logo. It can be any distinctive asset which has the ability to evoke the brand in memory without the brand name necessarily being present. So you probably all know, I'm using the word probably, know this brand. Right, it's Carlsberg, because the word itself is in the advertising line. The font is reminiscent of the brand logo and the little hop leaf and the colours, the green and white. So you don't need to use the brand name. In fact, when Carlsberg was a sponsor of the Euro Soccer Championships a few years ago in Paris, they had this all the way around the stadiums. And the reason why they did was because it's illegal in France to advertise your brand name. So they got around it brilliantly by understanding their distinctive assets. And this is a study that we do with a lot of clients. You can see these, we measure these empirically in terms of the implicit association with brands. So no prizes for guessing. Apple on the right, next to it Heineken. The grey shape next to that actually is quite interesting. That is Magnum, which is incredibly powerful, just a grey shape. Coca-Cola, we know the bottle shape. The kangaroo, some people say Qantas, others say Kangol, some people say Aussie shampoo. In fact, it's Foster's Lager. But now you can see, because the score is coming down, why it's coming down, because there's misattribution. Andy McDowell, in common with celebrities who endorse many different categories, and you don't forge that link with your brand. She's actually L'Oreal. Rihanna, who knows, it's actually Nivea. I've had to blank out the one that's -10 because it's a client and they don't want us showing it, unfortunately. But the truth is that they launched a product name that their competitor had used a very similar word name, one of the words in the name, 20 years before. and every time this client advertises, they activate their competitor brand in the brain. So you might want to know this before you launch. And we did this with Weetabix. I'm allowed to show you this because it's a case study. We identified their pack assets, and they redesigned, and they got better on-shelf visibility and fast findability. We also found that in comms that "Have you had your" was actually the only distinctive line in the category. And as a result, they resurrected the campaign. They came back with this Jack and the Beanstalk, "Have you had your Weetabix?" They grew in a market that was in decline, and they won an IPA effectiveness award because they resurrected a distinctive asset. And even though they hadn't used it for 3 years, it kind of didn't matter because it was still there. There were still memory traces for it. So this just shows you how you can harness this type of thing to great effect. Okay, now I want to move on to goals because this is incredibly important, and I want to draw a distinction when we look at motivation between emotion and goals, because they tend to get conflated, and you tend to go to conferences and see an image of an iceberg, and the speaker makes a claim such as 95% of decisions are driven by emotion. And I happened to be sat next to a neuroscience professor at a conference when that very same slide went up and that very same claim was made. And she leant over to me and said, used a technical expression, she said, "That's complete bollocks," which rather surprised me because I'd never heard that technical expression being used in a neuroscientific context before. But not just that, the actual fact that she'd said it. And I asked her to explain, and then, you know, exploring more, I gradually started to understand and to unpick emotion and motivation. So let's do this because it's incredibly important. So I don't know if you recall, 5 years ago, Budweiser Puppy Love Super Bowl ad, and their VP said and was quoted, "We basically won the Super Bowl. Puppy Love was the #1 spot pretty much across the board. We won the USA Today ad meter, had the most retweeted alcoholic beverage tweet ever, and the most likes on a Facebook post ever from an advertiser." And you know, why not? It's cute, it's charming. We all go gooey-eyed, and we love it, and we share it, and we talk about it. And the same VP for Anheuser-Busch, 10 months later, in an interview with Bloomberg, said that while everybody loves the puppies, they have zero impact on beer sales. Those ads I wouldn't air again because they don't sell beer. And I'm sure we all know examples of where people say they love an ad, but that's it, and it doesn't, it goes no further. So we need to distinguish between emotion and motivation, and we'll talk about the role of emotion in advertising as well. What motivates human beings? It's actually a part of the brain in the orbitofrontal cortex, which has been termed the reward system. And the reward system is there to help us choose and make decisions. And what it does is assign values to choices based on what our current needs are or current goals, what's relevant to us in the moment. And whether or not we behave or act on that value is driven by the expectation we have of a choice that we're going to make. And that expectation itself is based on the associations that we build with that choice over time. And that's why we don't all buy the same brand of watch or car or clothing, because the value expectations are very different, because the associations that we've learned with those brands are very different over time. And what brands do, and this is where this is all wrapped up, you know, those three compartments I talked about, they are all interlinked. And it comes back to Kahneman's point about perception, because brands change how we perceive a product. So we could have 2 cups of coffee in front of us and they look visually identical, right? There's coffee in this grey square. When we put contrasting frames around them, I hope software and hardware permitting, you can see that the smaller grey square in the middle now appears different. The one on the left appears to be a lighter shade of grey. than the one on the right, but believe me, they're identical. They're absolutely identical. All we've done is introduce this contrasting frame, and that's effectively what a brand does. A brand is a frame that changes our perception and can affect our perception of the product. And what's in the frame is effectively the proposition that's built on a set of associations. So with Starbucks, it's like the third place from home and work. You know, you have the baristas, the world music playing. It's like a short mental break, if you like. Whereas McCafe is much more functional. It's just a sort of, you know, a refueling while I grab some breakfast or grab some lunch or have a cup of coffee with the kids or whatever it might be. So a very different frame. The other effect that has is it creates a very different willingness to pay. You know, for a coffee that in blind tasting will probably not be perceived as very different. So this is important. And within the frame are the goals that we have come to learn to be associated with brands. And goals, when you look at it from a scientific point of view, there's a lot of alignment around neuropsychology that goals are the core of motivated behavior, whether we're aware of them or not. And let's explore this a bit more. Another phrase we often use to help understand goals is jobs to be done. You may have heard of this before. The late Clayton Christensen at Harvard talked about people hiring products or brands or services to do a job. You know, you don't buy a quarter-inch drill because it's a quarter-inch drill. You hire it to drill a quarter-inch hole. And brands exist to help us, to be instrumental in helping us achieve these goals or jobs to be done. And jobs to be done exist at a number of different levels, and they're all interlinked. You can't divorce them. They're interlinked, and they're intuitively interlinked. So we have what we call a value chain on the left-hand side here. You can see a mixture of features and occasions, which is how the job is delivered. So this could be an ingredient, it could be a service characteristic. It's how the brand delivers the job. That is intuitively linked with functional goals. Now, this is stuff that we're easily able to ask respondents, customers, consumers, any human being about. Why do you buy detergent? Why do you need an SUV? Why do you need a whatever it might be? People will tell you, because the functional side is easy to articulate, and it's also fundamental to having a successful brand or business. There's another level linked with that, and of course we know this, right? We've always talked about the sort of brand equity, this fluffy, intangible part, but the higher level jobs are a mixture of social, emotional, and psychological goals, which are about self-identity, about universal human needs and purpose, or emotional, social outcomes that are linked with using the category. And just to bring that to life, you know, if we looked at a product here, laundry detergent has an ingredient which is a chemical which is an optical brightener. It makes whites appear whiter. That can ladder to a functional goal of perfectly clean laundry, which ladders to an emotional and psychological goal of a sense of relief and perfection. Or another example, different industry credit cards, we may have a service feature which is early fraud detection. That meets a functional goal of my data's safe, it's protected, and an emotional psychological goal of safety. So I can feel a bit more carefree because I know that my data is protected. So this is how goals work. Now, that higher level, whilst the functional goals are easy to articulate, the higher level tend to be implicit. They are often non-conscious, almost impossible to articulate because we don't have introspective access to them. So again, we turn to science to help us understand, and science has determined the drivers of human behavior. And you may be familiar with this promotion prevention mindset. Prevention's about risk avoidance, effectively keeping hold of what I have, and promotion is about challenge and risk taking. It's about playing to win rather than playing not to lose. And there are three primary drivers in the brain: security, which is about protection, reassurance, caring for myself, caring for others; safety, closeness, warmth, belonging; excitement, which is the novelty seeking system in the brain. This is about change, variety, zest for life; innovation, curiosity; and autonomy, which is about power and superiority over others, and pride and self-esteem and self-confidence. So those are the three primary drivers of every human being on the planet. And they change with life stage, of course, and they can change with culture. Some drivers can be more or less important, and they certainly change by category. We've elaborated this to create this 6-field model you can see on the right-hand side, which has the three primary drivers, but also hybrid areas between them. So behaviour is a continuum. And within each of those areas, we have a set of goals, and I'll show you those in a moment. So where it comes back to marketing, where we take the human neuropsychology and bring it back to our world, is this really helps us understand relevance and distinctiveness. You may be familiar with those phrases from Byron Sharp, how brands grow, but relevance is effectively how well my brand delivers the drivers of category goals. So human beings buy a category first. I need transport, I need to clean my clothes, I'm hungry, whatever it might be. It's a category decision. And there will be goals in there that are more or less important, more or less relevant. So if my brand has a high overlap with those drivers, I'm incredibly relevant. You think of McDonald's and fast food, it's the prototype for the category. But also we can understand distinctiveness, because this is the degree to which those drivers are associated with our own brand uniquely or shared with other brands. And it's possible to identify all of this and measure it, and we do a huge amount of this around the world, looking to understand category drivers, brand equity, demand spaces, and how, having derived a set of drivers, we can then associate them with the brand. And that's exactly what got me into this. When I was VP for T-Mobile in Bonn, I had to relaunch the brand around Europe and reposition the brand. And I commissioned this quant research with DeCODE to look at category drivers and what made T-Mobile relevant and distinctive versus competition in each European market. And we decided on a set of goals that we wanted to associate with T-Mobile. And there are about 9. And together, those 9 goals have a gestalt meaning. And they are situated in certain parts of that map that I've just showed you. But those 9 goals were written in the advertising brief to Saatchi's that created the Liverpool Street Dance ad, the flash mob campaign, which you may recall is 10 years old now. But that one ad, which didn't feature any product, it didn't feature a proposition or a network message or call quality or coverage message or a promotion or a handset, that one ad is still the most successful telco ad in the UK. It grew sales by 49%. It grew penetration and frequency. It doubled footfall into T-Mobile stores within 48 hours. And just to put it in context, 41 million YouTube views is more than any John Lewis Christmas ad, and they're pretty famous. So this stuff works, and we then applied the same principles of building associations between the T-Mobile brand and a certain set of goals. We applied those across other brand touchpoints. So we changed the look and feel of the stores, we changed customer service interactions, we changed propositions themselves, and over a 2-year period, we halved customer churn, and we went from 4th in the market to joint top in customer satisfaction. A lot of people talk about, well, we need a product ad and then we need a brand ad. And I say that's nonsense. You cannot divorce the two, and nor should you, because that's not how the brain works. The brain doesn't compartmentalize product and brand. Take this, famous Barry Scott, in your face, seal it, bang, 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 very powerful, garish, loud. And you might think, well, that's a great product ad. It's all about the efficacy, right? It gets rid of all of this stuff. And if we use the map then to understand the more implicit social, emotional, psychological goals, it's easy to see that this sort of ad triggers protection, reassurance, efficiency, maybe control and reliability. It would also give us maybe some mental relief. the fact that you've achieved this cleaning thing, and perhaps some autonomy goals like doing my best or pride, and some sort of mastery. So there's nothing that is not emotional. It's impossible to have a so-called pure product rational ad and not trigger concomitant social, emotional, psychological goals, and nor should you seek to. That's the point. So where does emotion fit in decision making? And the scientists are quite clear. It's a feedback mechanism. What happens is when we're trying to achieve a certain goal, emotion feeds back as a gauge of the extent to which we are meeting a goal. So if I'm playing tennis to win and I'm losing, my emotional feedback is anger or frustration, and I may redouble my efforts in order to try and win. If I'm playing to win and I'm winning, I feel good, I feel great, I feel joy, I feel happiness. But they're outcomes of goal achievement or not. They're not drivers. And this is a really important distinction, particularly when it comes to writing communication briefs. It's useless telling an agency, we want people to feel joy with this ad. Fine, but there are millions of ways in which people can feel joy. So what's right for the category, what's right for your brand, more importantly, what goals are you trying to achieve? Because if you can make your brand credibly instrumental in helping people achieve those goals, you will elicit joy. But if you do it the other way around, like Budweiser Puppy, you get lots of joy but zero motivation, and that's really important to understand. So there we go. This has been a whistle stop. I hope you've enjoyed that. If you want to learn more, by all means, pick up a copy of my book, Decoded. I'm also happy if people want to continue the conversation by email or phone. I've got my contact details here. We're open to partnering opportunities with you if you wanted to do that. So I'm very happy to entertain any further discussion. So thank you for your attention, and now I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Phil. That was absolutely incredible. I could have gone on listening to you for hours. So let's just have a look and see if there are any questions. So yeah, we've got a few. Really interesting presentation, thank you. Can you recommend any thought leaders reading material using this approach specifically in the field of customer service, customer experience?
Yeah, there's one book called Friction, written by a guy called Richard Hammond, which I think is very good. Richard actually read my book and picked up on a point I didn't focus on today, which is that a purchase decision is based on the brain's evaluation of the expected reward I'm going to get from the purchase minus the expected pain incurred in that purchase. And pain is a combination of price, time and effort, so behavioural cost, if you like. And Richard has expanded this into the retail and customer experience sphere to look at friction overall. So exactly that. It's taken it from a sort of a general principle and then applied it. So I think that's good. There's also I can't point to any particular books, but you can certainly read, if you just do Google searches or Google Scholar searches around friction. There's a lot about, particularly in e-commerce, where you want someone to go on a journey and you want them to invest their time and effort in doing things. So there's increasingly a lot of work going on in trying to reduce friction or make it friction free, and ultimately getting to a sort of Amazon one-click purchase type of operation, because that is virtually friction free. Whereas a lot of e-commerce and websites fall down simply because they are disfluent to navigate, they request a lot of information, and people just can't be bothered. There's just too much effort, too much pain involved. So yeah, I'd certainly recommend a general search.
Okay, we have another question which doesn't really sound related to what you've just talked about, but do you ever feel surprised when winning a tennis match, Phil?
You might not feel well. You might feel surprised if the person is you expect them to be better than you and you beat them. But certainly, I would think it would be a lot more common to feel happy or feel good after winning a tennis match. Yeah, that's probably a lot more common.
Another comment that's come through: amazing, Phil, inspiring, thanks. And I have another question. Have you ever done any work for in the government sector, for example, in using this approach?
As a company, no, we haven't, but I'd love to. I think they could use some help. There is the Behavioural Insights team, which is morphed out of the so-called nudge unit, which David Cameron set up, which is applying behavioural science to a lot of public policy. So things like smoking cessation, anti-obesity, eating your 5 a day, tax compliance and things like that. And that a lot of those principles have extended across geographies as well. So the Behavioural Insights team still exists, and they do a lot of specialise in things called randomised controlled trials to test the sort of nudges. But I think that's really what they focus on. They haven't, in my understanding, they haven't focused on a lot of the stuff that we do around attention perception and the goals area.
Okay, another question here. I'm interested in how this might apply to B2B markets based on long purchase decision-making cycles for high investment products or services, i.e. a £1 million IT project for a large enterprise, or is this just different? So yes, how does this apply in the B2B sector?
It's a really good question, and I get asked that quite a lot. And going back to first principles, B2B customers and B2C customers don't have different brains, right? We've all got the same brain. They all operate to the same principles. There are a couple of key differences, however. The first is goals, and it is much more typical for B2B buyers to be motivated by goals in the fields that we call security and discipline. So B2B buyers require things that are going to give them control, that are about precision, logic, functionality, efficiency, protection, reassurance, and far less about risk taking, right? They're typically in a prevention mindset. So that's one thing about goals. The other thing, of course, is that in terms of characteristics, the decision-making criteria can be very different. Normally, a B2B buyer has a set of KPIs, and that there are measurable performances that a service or product has to meet. There's also a different decision chain. This is not me on my own going to a supermarket to buy a tin of beans. There's several people or layers of hierarchy involved in the decision, and they all may have different goals as well. The IT buyer may be looking motivated by a certain set of goals, but the users may be motivated by something different. So it's more complex to navigate as a vendor. If you're a supplier to a B2B organization, it's more complex because you have to take these differences into account. But the underlying principles are the same. And don't forget as well that B2B buyers are exposed to B2C environment. So they see brand adverts, they will form associations as well. And just one final point, thinking about their need for discipline and security, that probably says there's more of a need for product information which will feed System 2, because System 2 does play a very important role in rationalizing our decisions. So if we can give it proof and evidence, and system 2 will process that, then that helps support the decision as well.
Okay, thank you. How do you measure the lift in sales due to a particular advert? i.e., how do you isolate the lift due to the ad as opposed to anything else?
That was, well, in the case of T-Mobile and in the case of the IPO effectiveness award papers, it's done by econometric modelling, and they insist on that because they've found it's the only way to try and isolate all of the noise in the system, if you like. So when papers are submitted, they have the IPA actually have a separate team of people who only examine the model that's been used and the assumptions that have gone into the model and the data that's fed the model. So that's how it's done.
Okay, I think that's the last question that we've got for the time being. Another comment, great presentation. Thanks for the answers. Yeah, just lots of positive comments coming through, Phil. But apart from that, I think that's our last question. So unless anybody sends through another question right now. No, thanks, fascinating stuff, inspiring presentation, really useful, thank you. So lots of positive feedback. If anybody does think of any more questions after the webinar, then Phil has said that he's happy to answer those for us. So do send those through, I guess, to Lucy or to me. And yes, I think that's it. So thanks once again, Phil, for taking us through that whistle-stop tour. That really was very interesting, giving us lots to think about.
You're very welcome. Thanks everyone for your attention.
Thank you very much, everyone, also for following us today, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks. Bye.